Everyone knows that prices go up every year for things. And they just think that that's some kind of phenomenon of nature. But what's happening is that the money is being debased. And so the money that you're earning doesn't buy as much. And every year, if prices are going up 2 or 3 or 5%, you are being stolen from 2 or 3 or 5% on top of the taxation that you're already suffering. And that's actually, I think, the worst. That's worse than the explosion at the end, because no one perceives it.
We actually target it. The Fed wants to bring up inflation rates because it will help juice the economy.
The Fed is incredible in that they have convinced society that inflation is something that they will keep under control. Like, thank goodness that they're here to keep inflation from going rampant. But they are the inflators. They are the
ones that create inflation.
Right.
As we're taping this, the cost of a single Bitcoin is about $58,000. Denver's pretty lucky to have one of the guys who is big into the cryptocurrency industry, Erik Voorhees from ShapeShift.com.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, so you years ago suggested I buy Bitcoin. And so I finally bought a Bitcoin, and I want to thank you. It's awesome. It's got the B, it's got the things.
Yeah.
What's weird is online it's $58,000. I got this on eBay for like $5. And so that's a deal. All right.
Yeah, well, so that's of course not a real Bitcoin, but it
says Bitcoin.
It does say
right
Bitcoin,
there.
Similar to how dollars used to say that, they were real dollars. That's explicitly just a memento for fun usage.
Now you tell me.
Not a real Bitcoin.
All right, so here's what I'd like to do. You and I have talked a lot about the basics of cryptocurrencies. I want to spend just a couple minutes, bring people up to speed on that.
Yep.
And then I'd really like to have a conversation on why cryptocurrency doesn't work, that this is a bubble, it will fail, and I will explain to you why this is a bad thing. And also, while we do that, I do want to get into the idea of what is money, because that's what I find the most fascinating part about cryptocurrency. So first of all, cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, and there's thousands of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin is the most popular. What is it? Because you can't hold a Bitcoin, therefore it does not exist.
Yeah, so you can't really hold a dollar either, of course. All the dollars that are in your bank account are just digital. Some dollars, a very tiny portion, have a paper token that represents what's in the bank, but those are also digital. So people first need to realize that Bitcoin being digital is actually nothing new. What a Bitcoin is simply a unit of account on a distributed ledger.
When you say distributed ledger, and by the way, it took me a long time to wrap my brain around this, so you're having a hard time. There's plenty of YouTube videos on this kind of stuff, and you ought to go check it out. But the idea is that instead of my bank having one accounting system that shows how much money is in my account, that this is distributed over a massive network of independent computers that check one another. And therefore, it's kind of this open ledger of who owns what Bitcoin. They might not know who you are, but they know this Bitcoin is here, and if you switch it, it goes over there.
Yeah, so a good analogy to use a bank, which people are a little familiar with, is that the bank has servers where all the digital dollars are tracked, right? These servers have a list of accounts, Bob's account, Alice's account, and each account has a certain balance of dollars in the bank. And when deposits are made, the balance goes up, and when withdrawals are made, the balances go down. Bitcoin is similar to that, except the servers, the computers that are processing those deposits, tracking that ledger, is distributed across thousands of computers. So instead of just one bank, it's thousands of computers all around the world. And these are random people that run servers that all connect with each other to keep the balance updated. And if Alice sends a Bitcoin to Bob, all of the servers around the world make a note that Alice lost a Bitcoin and Bob gained a Bitcoin. And that's how it works. So on that level, it's not that strange.
Then let me get to the point that, as a guy who's into monetary theory, why this fascinated me from the get-go. So we used to have gold coins or silver coins, and you could do things with those. They were actually metal. You could melt them down. They had value for jewelry, silver for making things. And we used to give them to one another, and that was a currency. It was a means of exchange. And we got to realize it really sucks carrying around a bunch of silver. Mm-hmm. And so let's write out a piece of paper that says this is worth one piece of silver, because that's a lot easier. And that's back when we were on what was known as a gold standard or some sort of commodity standard, that this bill meant something.
Well, yeah, you're forgetting an important step there, which was that that silver or that gold was put into a bank, and then the bank issued that paper, right? You own one piece of gold or 1 ounce of silver.
All right.
And that paper was what you would then trade with because it was more convenient. And anyone that held the paper could go back to the bank and get the metal.
The Bank of England would probably be the perfect example of that, which was they have vaults full of gold, and they put out notes. And the notes were transferable for a certain amount of gold. Fort Knox is full of gold. That gold backed up our dollar. And then starting with I think it was the Great Depression, but ending with Richard Nixon, they broke ties so that they could print more dollars. And really, it's backed by the full faith of the American government that a dollar is worth something. But as we've seen with the German mark before World War I, what we saw with Zimbabwe dollars, once it's not tied to something physical, something limited, you can just make more of them. You call that fiat. Why do you call that fiat?
Yeah, so dollars today are fiat. Fiat is Latin for by decree, right? So dollars have value by decree of the state. The state says, these are the money you shall use. That's why it has value. Obviously, the difference between a $1 bill and a $100 bill is nothing other than the pattern of ink printed on it. They're both the same thing. Just like the dollar in a Monopoly game and the 500 in a Monopoly game are the same thing. They're just different colors. And yet people value one at 500x the other. That's fiat. And the opposite of fiat is something that has value because of the marketplace, right? So gold is not fiat. It has value because people trade it in the marketplace and no one told them to do that. Bitcoin is not fiat because no one told someone that it has value. It's just traded in the marketplace. So that's the distinction between fiat and non.
All right, so what excites me about crypto is that, like gold, and let's assume this is a gold coin, like gold, it's pretty hard to find this. You got to mine it, you got to do it. There's only so many of them. I mean, they'll grow the more we mine, but there's only so much gold, and therefore it's a commodity, and that commodity is limited, and therefore anything attached to it is also limited. Once you say, no, the government can print more of it or go into debt and buy more of it, it becomes a fractional system, which has been very good because the more money we have, the more we get to spend, the more we get to spend, the more we get to buy, the more we buy, the more jobs there are, and we just keep putting money into the economy. At some point, that explodes. And we've seen it throughout history exploding. We saw it in Zimbabwe, where people would actually be carrying around $10 billion notes, as you say, just ink.
Yeah.
So what keeps Bitcoin or any of those cryptos from just doing that? It's a piece of code. I copy pictures all the time online, and so therefore.
Yeah. Well, so I'll answer that in a second. But you say that when governments print all this money, it explodes, and that absolutely can happen, and you end up with like a hyperinflation kind of thing. But there's actually a much more insidious phenomenon that happens without it exploding. This is called inflation, right? Everyone knows that prices go up every year for things, and they just think that that's some kind of phenomenon of nature. But what's happening is that the money is being debased, and so the money that you're earning doesn't buy as much. And every year, if prices are going up 2 or 3 or 5%, you are being stolen from 2 or 3 or 5% on top of the taxation that you're already suffering. And that's actually, I think, the worst. That's worse than the explosion at the end because no one perceives it.
We actually target it. The Fed wants to bring up inflation rates because it will help juice the economy.
The Fed is incredible in that they have convinced society that inflation is something that they will keep under control. Like, thank goodness that they're here to keep inflation from going rampant. But they are the inflators.
They are the ones that create inflation.
Right.
We have in this last go-around between George W., who inflated the money supply, and then Obama, who really inflated the money supply. And now with COVID under Trump, it went up, and now under Biden, we've got $2 billion more, mostly being made out of thin air.
Yeah, every president prints more under their watch than the president before them. So that's been the case for a long time. So to get back to your question, why is Bitcoin scarce? Everyone kind of understands why gold is scarce. There's only so much of it in the universe. Why is Bitcoin scarce? It's scarce because the code says it is scarce. There's a variable in the code that says only 21 million Bitcoin will ever exist, and they get mined asymptotically over time, and it will never get more than 21 million units ever. You can absolutely copy the code and make like Bitcoin 2, and then now you have 21 million of those, or you could even change that variable, and now you have 50 million Bitcoin 2s. But those aren't Bitcoin. And what makes Bitcoin so robust and resilient is that it's not just about the code, it's about the network effect of people using it. So if you copy the Bitcoin code and you make, the Caldara coin, I'm not probably going to pay you $58,000 for that.
Not yet.
Not yet. I mean, it's free market, right? So you can convince me it's going to appreciate, and maybe you've improved on Bitcoin in X, Y, or Z ways. So you're free to try. And certainly many cryptocurrencies all exist and compete with each other. But you can't, even though you can copy the Bitcoin code, you can't copy the network. And the network is what gives it its value.
People who don't believe that, and a decade ago, it would be hard to believe what you just said. But we now have over a decade of experience with Bitcoin, and to my understanding, a Bitcoin or any coin really has not been duplicated. That is, if you have one digital token, there is not a replication of that particular token. I don't think it's ever happened.
Correct. Yeah. There were some really crazy bugs in the very earliest days, like in its first year, including one that created like 100 billion coins or something nuts. It is software, it can have bugs. But yeah, it has been running now for over a decade with the rules being maintained. And so I think it's important for people to realize that even though it's been running for 10 years, 12 years, it could still have bugs. Like, it is not a risk-free proposition. You can't own a Bitcoin and just assume it's always perfect and infallible. But every day that goes by, it becomes more reasonable to trust it. So the longer it's around, the better, and the more likely those bugs would have been found.
All right. Then let's get into why it ain't going to work, why it's a bad idea. But first, just to go over what we have. It's a digital currency, it's a digital coin, it's a marker. It would be kind of like saying we're going to trade in Beanie Babies because people valued Beanie Babies. That's great, we can trade in Beanie Babies. But if you could just make more Beanie Babies, it doesn't work. But if there's a limit to it, then all of a sudden trading that asset works. That's what Bitcoin does. And that's, for me, the magic of the coin. So let's get into it.
And real quick on that point, the real innovation that Bitcoin brought that had never been done before, it had never been solved in all of human history, was creating something that was digital and scarce. Bitcoin was the first thing that ever did that. That was its great innovation.
Because any Word document you can make a copy of.
Exactly. Any MP3 you can copy. Right. So any digital money that came before Bitcoin, the only way you could prevent the coins from being copied was if you had some kind of central server that enforced the rules. But if the central server is corrupted, or if the owner of that central server changes the rules, then the money is copied or increased. So Bitcoin removed any central party from owning it or running it. And the rules of the network are self-reinforcing. It doesn't assume anyone is a good actor. And that was really the breakthrough.
And by the way, I want to get to that and why the Federal Reserve, I think, will want to find a way to take it out. But first, let me go through the other stuff. My coin, my gold coin here, it is something. It is something. Your little cute thing, it's fine. There's nothing there. Yeah. And for those people who have a hard time wrapping their brain around, you want me to spend 50 grand to buy something that doesn't exist in reality. This has got scam written all over it. So, I at least have gold. My gold can be used in semiconductors. It can be used for jewelry. I can do all sorts of things. I can pound it into a spoon or a knife. I can't do a damn thing with one of your tokens.
Yeah, that's also true of dollars, of course, right? Again, dollars are all digital. The fact that 3% of them have a physical piece of paper that represents them is the exception that proves
Is it 3%?
It's something like that. It's like 3 or 4% of dollars are actually physical cash. The rest is just digital money in a bank account. People think that when they take their money and put it in the bank has this like vault of cash. Actually, a lot of people still think that it's gold.
Right.
An amazing amount of people still think that the dollar is backed by gold. The smarter ones think that it's cash that's just in the vault. But that's also not true. A lot of people don't realize, for example, that when you get a mortgage, they think that the bank has a bunch of cash and they will lend you some of that money and you pay them interest over time. In reality, when you get a mortgage, the bank creates the money in your account out of thin air. And then you get to pay them back with your hard-earned work.
And you don't realize
no one knows this.
When you put your dollar in the bank account, there might be a dime there as a reserve, but the other 90 cents are going out the back door to all sorts of other things. It's a fractional banking system.
Correct.
The old Bank of England, you had a £1 note and there was a certain amount of metal there for you. And it really couldn't grow. All right. Yeah. So you're telling me it still has value.
Yeah,
even though I can't.
Your question is about physicality.
Yeah, physicality.
Right?
It's not real.
So if someone thinks
just like love, if you can't see it, it does not exist.
Exactly. So if someone wants to think that because something isn't physical, it can't have value, I can't argue with that. Like, that's obviously a stupid opinion. Most things that people do these days are digital, right? Google is a digital company. It is worth billions of dollars. Digital companies are all over the place. People use social media all the time. To say that those things have no value because they're digital is really absurd. So not only is the digital nature of Bitcoin not a reason that it can't have value, because it is digital, it can do all sorts of things that gold can't. And this is why many of us believe that Bitcoin will be a much larger market than gold eventually. If I have $1 million of gold and I want to move across a border, that's a pretty scary proposition. This is going to be found at the airport, seized immediately. I'll be questioned. If the regime I live under is at all problematic, it'll just be stolen from me. I could try to ship it, but then that's going to be expensive. I have to trust the shipping company. It will take several days to arrive. I'll have to pay for insurance and all that. I can send not $1 million of Bitcoin, but I could send $1 billion of Bitcoin anywhere on Earth in 20 seconds. And not only will it not get seized at the border won't even know that it happened, and no one can even stop it if they knew that it happened. And to say that a system that allows someone to do that can't have value is absurd.
Which goes to my next point of why this needs to be stopped, is because it is used for criminal activity constantly. It was built as a way to avoid the law. It was avoid taxes. We heard about what happened with a service called the Silk Road, where Bitcoin was used to hire hitmen and buy drugs and guns and bombs. It is only terrorists are interested in Bitcoin because it's not tracked.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, to clear the record a little bit, Silk Road, you could buy drugs on, you could not buy guns, and you could not hire people to murder others. So Silk Road was basically just allowing people to voluntarily transact drugs with each other. Those who would
disagree with you on that assessment.
Well, it's not something you can disagree on. It was a place on the internet where you could buy things, but there were not guns, there was not anything violent. There was lots of drugs.
You'll concede a lot of illegal activity happens, and Bitcoin was a way to transfer. You said across borders. Well, that's what terrorists do, and when you're holding somebody ransom, this is a wonderful way to get your ransom money across without having to have a suitcase full of dollars. That's why people like Bitcoin.
Criminals absolutely can use Bitcoin. Absolutely. It's a useful tool. Criminals also use cell phones. Criminals also use cars. Criminals also eat bread and drink water. Any useful tool for humanity is going to be used by humanity, and part of humanity, unfortunately, are bad people. However, Bitcoin is not great for criminal activity because it is actually quite trackable. And this is a bit of a nuanced topic. So when you create a Bitcoin account, you do not attach your name to that account. It's a string of numbers that is your account number, and you can receive Bitcoin at that number. However, everything is tracked on the blockchain, on this distributed database.
When you say blockchain, it helped me to understand that what it is, it's a bank ledger, but everybody shares it. It is an open book, not a closed book.
An open book.
And it is verified when enough other computers that other people own say, yeah, I see it, I see the transfer, I see the transfer. All right, we all agree, Caldera gave Voorhees a Bitcoin. Got it, it's on the ledger.
Yep. So it's all open. So anyone can go on the internet and find block explorers, and you can look at transactions, and you can say, okay, 15 Bitcoin was sent from this address to this address, and then 6 Bitcoin was sent from that address to another address. So with reasonably sophisticated software, law enforcement can and does track all sorts of criminal activity of this, because you can actually learn a lot of things even though there aren't names attached, right? So can it be used for crime? Yeah. Is it a great tool to hide from authorities? Absolutely not. Because not only is it trackable, but it's trackable forever. So not only do you have to not...
Let me explain why you're wrong and terrorists like you lie about this crap. Because there are also services that can help randomize your Bitcoin. That is, so I just got my ransom for selling the uranium-238 to the terrorists. They gave me $100 million in Bitcoin. I can give it to a guy who then sends it out in a million little pieces and then filters it around and then collects it back for me. You know, and maybe it's only, he'll take a 10%, but now it's been basically anonymous, and then I can go sell it.
The vast majority of all criminal activity still happens with US dollar cash. So just to level set a little bit, that's the preferred tool of criminals, is US dollar cash. And I think if cash was proposed today as like a new instrument, like if cash didn't exist and then someone invented cash, the government would shut that down immediately, right? Because it would be used for money laundering.
Especially if it didn't back anything.
Well, even if it was their own money, like if that was a new invention tomorrow, it would have been shut down because that's what criminals use. So I think people need to keep that context in mind. You're correct that if someone is really sophisticated, they can generally hide the trail of how the Bitcoins move around. But they have to be really sophisticated. And in all criminal enterprises, if you're really sophisticated, you're generally going to be able to outmaneuver the authorities, right? So there's no perfect system. And I think if people's standard is no bad guy can ever use this thing, that's actually not a very good standard to have, especially when you consider different jurisdictions, right? So the same principles, the same attributes that allow someone to launder some ill-gotten gains with Bitcoin also allow an oppressed wife in Saudi Arabia who has an abusive husband to hide value from her husband and escape that relationship. She can't do that with banks. She can't do that with cash. It'll be seized at the border. She'll be jailed and probably tortured. But she can actually hold Bitcoin outside of the law, outside of her own husband knowing about it, and she can actually have self-empowerment and escape that kind of situation. So people should be very careful about being upset when a tool allows you to get outside of the bounds of law. Because even us in the US, while we have problems with the government is okay in many respects. And in many other places in the world, it is a life or death situation. And Bitcoin helps those people.
All right, fine. It helps some people. But let me tell you where it hurts people.
Okay.
It hurts people because when someone steals something from me, someone steals my credit card or my credit card number, there is law that protects me. I call Visa and I go, I didn't charge that. They go, I'm so sorry, Mr. Caldera. We will take care of that. Yeah. And I won't lose anything. As somebody who has lost Bitcoin in some exchanges and feel like a moron afterwards for it, there is nobody to call. There is no bank to call to say, I was overcharged, or I put an extra zero there and I didn't mean to. Can you No, it is a complete honor system, and there's not a lot of honor in a lot of folks.
It's not an honor system. It's
if I overpay you,
it's a mathematic system.
It is your honor to give me the money back. And
yeah, so in the Visa example, it's not law why you get your money back from Visa. It's actually just Visa wants to provide a good service, right? So if something got screwed up, they have in their own budgets that they are able to cover certain costs at certain times to make sure that their brand is good and that their customers are happy.
And Mr. Coin, Mr. Bitcoin, he does not want my return business, because when I lost something in Bitcoin, I tried to call him. There was no phone number to call. There was no website to go to. There was no place to file a complaint. His customer service sucked.
Yeah. Bitcoin isn't a company. It has no customer support. There's no office building that you can go and ask them, like, where's my money? Bitcoin is a protocol. It's a money protocol based on mathematics. And anyone who follows the rules of that mathematics commands Bitcoin at their whim. It is the principle that allows you to be completely sovereign over your money, which is something that people are just not used to. And it's a principle that means if you screw up, there's no one to call. So that's the bad news. Like, there's no one to call if you screw up, and certainly many people screw up. The good news is it's not that hard to learn how to not screw up. It takes a little bit of education, but just as people spend time learning how to drive, because if you screw up when you're on the highway, you're dead, just as people learn how to, they spend time to learn how to ride a bicycle, right? There's a personal responsibility that comes with Bitcoin. And if you are willing to take some personal responsibility, you can learn relatively easily how to use it very safely, how to make backups so that you don't ever screw up and lose your money. But it's not automatic. It doesn't just happen if you're lazy. So a lot of people, that's a problem. They want a lazy solution where they can always call up someone else. But there are problems with that. When you can always call up someone else, who also can call up someone else? The government. You know, who can call Visa? The government. They can freeze your credit card because they called up Visa. The government can't freeze my Bitcoins. I mean, that's incredibly empowering.
Well, what are you doing that you're worried about the government freezing your Bitcoin?
Well,
if you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't worry about any of that stuff.
I advocate Bitcoin, which is reason enough probably for them to try to freeze it.
Actually, I'd love to get into some of the stories on some of the hassles you've had to go through personally. I find that amazing. All right, then I'm going to keep going at you.
Let's do it.
Pardon me. All right. It's secure. I get it. Democracy. Poor lady in Saudi Arabia. Got it. But it's a scam. It is so volatile that you can lose your life savings in this. I remember when it was $10 a coin. When I started, thinking about this, it shot up to $1,100, and everyone went crazy. And then it bottomed out, went back down to $200 or something, and then it went up to 20 grand, and then went down to and now it's up over $50,000. This thing is uncontrollable, and therefore, if you put your resources, you work to make dollars, you convert those dollars into Bitcoin, it's a lousy store of your wealth because you don't know what it's going to be worth tomorrow.
It's true you don't know what it's going to be worth tomorrow. However, it's not like it's going to be worth $1 tomorrow, and it's not going to be worth $1 million tomorrow. There is some degree of stability to it. It is roughly as volatile as a large cap stock, right? So people own stock. They understand that the value can go up and down. If you put your life savings into any financial asset, you can lose tremendous amounts of money. And I would never, and have never, told anyone ever to put all of their life savings into Bitcoin.
You told me to do that over and over.
No, I did not.
So
I didn't, because if I did and you did it, you would have been a billionaire by now. So I know that that's not true. It's very risky, and people need to understand it as a risky, speculative asset.
All right, you. I just want to repeat that. You see it as a risky, speculative asset.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Was 10 years ago, is today. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And do you ever foresee a period where the volatility of price lessens?
Yeah. It actually has lessened.
The dollar is the same thing. The dollar is worth more or less compared to other currencies.
The dollar is quite stable, but it falls towards zero over time, but it is relatively stable. So you can think of the dollar as like being on a relatively predictable descent toward nothing. And that's what people are comfortable with. Bitcoin is a very highly volatile asset that is the greatest performing investment of the last decade easily. It has provided something like 200% compound annual returns for a decade. There is no financial asset that has ever done that in history, ever.
Let me tell you this story. Fortunately, I have a time machine, and it's cool. I went backward in time, and I saw a guy who wanted to buy a gallon of gas, and he had 2 quarters in his hand. Mm-hmm. One quarter was a 1964 quarter. The other one was a 1965 quarter. It was 1965. I was there. He used the 65 quarter, and he bought his gallon of gas. Then he came back to my period of time. He took his 1964 quarter, and he bought a gallon of gas.
Yeah, silver.
Because it was silver. And that is deflationary. That because they changed from silver quarters to a mesh, cheaper quarter, this held its value. And so back when Americans wanted to hold value, they wanted to save. And when dollars were backed by a commodity, gold, people were rewarded for saving because your dollar would buy you more next year than it buys you now. Today, the dollar buys you less next year than now, which means you're going to spend more and you should go into debt in order to get more now before the price goes up.
Yeah.
Our whole economy is spending and debt based.
Yeah, and even at the top end of society, the financial industry is constantly feels the pressure to chase returns because the money that they are chasing returns in is being depreciated every year. So it causes all sorts of perverse incentives when the thing you're trying to store value in is decaying slowly under your eyes. But that's the status quo. That's what people are used to. And the decaying, again, to go back to the earlier point, isn't a force of nature. It is because the money is being debased.
By the government.
By the government. The reason that the silver is still as valuable or even more valuable is that it can't be debased. The fiat is garbage. But it's also more stable than Bitcoin, right? So if someone can't handle volatility, they should not own Bitcoin.
What should they own?
Gold would be much better store of value if you are very worried about volatility.
Let me ask you, now I want to get really detailed. So there's a coin out there called Tether. I want to ask you about Tether because it seems to me that Tether is a scam, and I want to get your opinion on this. So the idea of everything you've just described, and there's Ethereum, and there's a million different coins, and this one that's Tether, the idea is that it will always be worth $1, mm-hmm. and it's always worth $1. So if you have $10, you can buy 10 of these, and it's terrific. But we're finding out that the company that's supposed to hold on to your dollars for you might not be doing that. So you've got a coin that can be debased, that can be inflated. There is no limit to it. And some speculate that, then those guys are using all this cash and their tethers to play the Bitcoin game. And some have argued that Tether has manipulated Bitcoin prices and people have made money by currency manipulation, basically. Yeah. And if they get caught, or when it's found out that they don't have the money they have, all of this could go tumbling down and taking Bitcoin with it. Yeah. Tell me about this thing called Tether. And mind you,
good question. So Tether has been a long-standing project, which has had its share of controversy for sure. The basic concept is, if you have a bank or you work with a bank, and a customer deposits $1 in that bank, you could issue them a crypto token, not a Bitcoin, but a different crypto token that says it's a bearer bond for the $1 in the bank. Here's the token. If you ever bring this token back to me, I'll give you the $1 in the bank.
And for those people not following, when you say token, you mean
digital.
A digital thing. It's not real. It's right.
Good point. So why would someone want to do this? Well, that digital token can move around the world just as easily as a Bitcoin can, right? Everything I said about moving across a border, being unstoppable, all these kind of things, those attributes also apply to that Tether token. However, the Tether token requires that you trust the issuer of the token has an actual dollar in the bank. So the reason that it's inferior to Bitcoin is obviously because you have to trust someone again. There's the Tether company that you have to trust and the bank that Tether works with that you have to trust. Now, from my personal experience, both of those entities are trustworthy, and Tether is actually a legitimate project. And people have been claiming that these are unbacked for forever. And a good way to sort of disprove that just from a market perspective is that if they were unbacked, any wealthy profit-seeking individual or groups of individuals could open a massive short position on Tether, drive it to zero, and as it collapses, they could reap, incredible rewards through a speculative attack. That has not happened. And Tether trades tens of billions of dollars a day in volume.
So Tether also does not open up its books. I don't see an audited statement.
Show me any bank that opens up its books.
Well, they open up their books to regulators from the government. So there's something
that means this much to me. I mean, the Federal Reserve has never been audited itself, right? So it is a little weird to hold a company to a higher standard than the Federal Reserve if what you're trying to say is that Tether is less trustworthy than dollars.
So to boil this down, you don't believe that Tether has been used to manipulate the Bitcoin market?
We have to define manipulate here a little bit, right? Because that's a very squishy word that sounds bad when you say it. The Tether company makes tons of money by operating legitimately, by taking in dollars, issuing these tokens, and imagine the interest that they earn on $100 billion of cash that they have in a bank account, right? That's an incredible business. For them to risk all that for some short-term speculative market trading, which they could maybe get away with for a few months, would be the height of foolishness.
They did just have to pay a multi-million-dollar fine to the state of New York and eat some crow and open their books to some folks there.
There are some skeletons in the closet with Tether, right? So a few years ago, the government, I believe it was the New York government, seized a bank account of a Caribbean bank, or they seized the whole bank. That bank had in it the deposits of Tether, right? So government steals all this money from this other bank. Tether then had to figure out what the hell do we do right now? Because all this cash that we had for our customers has just been seized by the government, and maybe we're not even going to get it for 10 years as they go through their court proceedings. So there was a period of time where some portion of the Tether was unbacked. Why was it unbacked? Because the government stole all the money from the bank that Tether was trying to use. So these things are a little more complicated than some of the headlines make them out to be. Nevertheless, Tether persevered through that. They have all the dollars that they needed back. They have made tons of money, enough to cover all of the shortfalls that they had from that theft. And again, none of this is meant to get people to go buy Tethers, but it is trying to refute a bit of the sensationalist headlines that people have been trying to spread about that company for several years.
All right. Let me tell you again why this is going to fail.
Okay.
We've mentioned the Federal Reserve several times. We are now in a huge inflationary period, and I mean that by money supply. I think at some point that's going to translate into real inflationary prices, price inflation. And for a lot of Americans have no idea what inflation is. It was something they heard about in school. Those of us old enough to remember, it was devastating when you've got double-digit inflation.
In the 70s.
Yeah. Fortunately, when it happened, I witnessed it, but I was too young. It was Dad's problem. That's the way you want to experience any financial upheaval.
Yeah.
That being said, if I will say when the American dollar really starts getting devalued, and if the only way to really stop inflation is you have to limit the money supply. The Fed does that by raising interest rates. You raise interest rates, then what the federal government has to spend on its massive debt goes up and up and up and up. And the best way to solve all this is to just inflate it away. Mm-hmm. Your Bitcoin, your can't be inflated away, and it is a massive threat to fiat currencies around the globe. Yeah. It is dangerous as hell in their eyes. Yeah. And because of that, at some point, I believe they're going to try to regulate it out of existence. And we're already seeing that with a lot of the regulations in order to open an account. There's a lot of know your customer laws now, and you've got to give them blood samples and 3 copies of your birth certificate and retinal scans, and just to be able to get your money out of Bitcoin. And And so I might still own a Bitcoin after the Fed says you can't have it. Just like FDR said you couldn't have gold. They're going to say you can't have Bitcoin. Where the hell am I going to go to exchange my Bitcoin for food or a house or a college education or for something of value? This is why it will, when that hits, the price is going to drop through the floor.
Yeah, certainly if the government, the federal government, other governments in the world outright banned the ownership of Bitcoin, which they could do. They could say it's illegal to own it. The price would probably plummet significantly. How far? I don't know. It probably doesn't happen
not to zero, you think?
Not to zero. I don't think that happens until Bitcoin's worth more than $1 million a coin. So maybe it falls down to 100,000. I don't know. That's very hard to predict. But they could do that, and then it would just be a black market item, just like gold was in 1933. Yet gold outlasted the law. Gold is still a huge part of finance and modern society. Alcohol was also made illegal in the 20s, and yet somehow that outlasted the law and became present here in our modern society. Bitcoin, similarly, will outlast any attempt to make it illegal. Because people...
You say that with such certainty, I want to believe you.
Yeah, it's not certain, right? Like, I could be wrong. But it is economically important for humanity to have a form of value that they own, control, can transfer between each other. That is such an important part of society that society as a whole over the long term will not permit such a thing to be removed from it. Just like if the government tried to outlaw the internet, that is too important of a technology for it to ever be outlawed over the long term.
But they do outlaw the internet. Go to China, and while it's still there, there are searches you can't do, there are things you cannot see, there are people you cannot talk to, there are virtual private networks you're not able to access, otherwise you'll go to prison for it and be tortured. So, I mean, there's some...
Governments ruin people's lives. I mean, I will not debate that point. And Bitcoin is an existential threat to fiat currency generally and to the dollar specifically.
Therefore, an existential threat to government itself.
Yeah, that's why I care about it.
I see the twinkle in your eye when you say that, but it scares to death people who believe that there is security in the government regulatory world.
I think a good way to frame this is that most people like having governments, right? I'm not one of them, but I understand most people think that that's important. Government funds itself through three things, right? It has taxes, it has borrowing, where it issues bonds, and that just means taxes in the future, and it has printing of money, currency debasement. If Bitcoin really takes over, like I think it will, 10, 20, 30 years from now, it doesn't remove governments from society. However, it does remove that third method of funding. Governments will not be able to inflate currency anymore to fund themselves. They will be forced to be a little bit more honest with how they raise their money, which will mean taxes and borrowing. No longer will they be able to debase people's savings and steal, discreetly 2 or 3 or 4% of everyone's money every year without them even realizing what's going on. I think people in future generations will look back at that and realize like that was an incredible financial scam that was happening for decades. And people will be embarrassed that that was permitted to happen. And Bitcoin will be seen as like, oh, thank goodness we finally have an alternative.
I see a lot of upheaval before that happens. I believe it's going to be very painful as that happens.
I agree.
And I will want to have a little Bitcoin and a little gold should that all happen, whether it happens now or in 50 years. All right, a few other things I want to get to. So you're talking as if Bitcoin is money. Mm-hmm. The IRS says it ain't money. Matter of fact, the Treasury Department and the IRS seem to have completely bifurcated thoughts on this. All I know is if I sell my Bitcoin, they see it as selling a stock. And if I take a loss, I can take a loss. And if I get money, I have to pay taxes. And if I buy a drink from you, I've got to tell the IRS about it and pay taxes on that because I have given you stock. And so I've received value, and I have to be taxed on that value. What is it? Is it a stock, or is it a is it currency? And how should the IRS deal with it? Because if it's money, it's just money. You can tax my interest on it, but if it's a stock, then you get to tax my capital gains on it. And
Yeah.
as you said, 200% a year.
They don't treat it as a stock. They treat it as property. So
By the way, we're finishing up all the semi-empty bottles of scotch.
give me a little bit more.
All right.
Give me a little bit more. The IRS treats Bitcoin and all crypto assets as property, right? So there's very well-defined rules on the tax implications of property sales.
It's like you're buying a house and you sell it for a profit.
Yep, and equities, stocks would fall under that same category as well. So yeah, if you buy Bitcoin at $1,000 and sell it at $10,000, you have $9,000 of gain. If you held it longer than a year, it's long-term gains. If it was less than a year, it's short-term gains. Yeah, obviously that's a pain in the butt. And if you go and buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin, technically you're supposed to do a basis calculation on the Bitcoin and then send some pennies to the IRS, for that purchase. How many people actually do that? Probably not many. Just like
enough to land you in jail should they want to prosecute you for tax evasion.
Sure. But if I gave someone on the street $10, they are also supposed to report that as income to the IRS, and I doubt 99 out of 100 would do it, right? So there's a question of scale. Obviously, anyone who is interacting with Bitcoin at any material scale should probably be very careful about how they do it, right? And any proficient tax accountant can tell you how to handle these things relatively easily.
Do you see it as a stock, as an asset, or do you see it as currency? If you could convince the federal government or even the state of Colorado to declare it something, what would it be?
I don't really want them to declare it anything. It's fundamentally it is a commodity, and I say that not in the regulated commodity sense, but that's what it is. It's an asset.
It's a limited
It's a
thing.
commodity. And if you use it as money, it becomes money to those who are using it as such. The same would be true for gold. It's a commodity, it's an asset, and if you're using gold as money, which people did long ago, then it's money in that case. And the government doesn't need to say something is money for it to be used as such.
In other words, I can buy a business with stocks. I will trade you these stocks, and you trade me those stocks. I give you those stocks, you give me this house.
Sure. Yeah, and you can buy all sorts of things with Bitcoin. You can buy houses and it's not ideal for small transactions because there are transaction fees, but it's great for large transactions.
What is a transaction fee?
Good question.
So, if I go to like Coinbase or someplace and I buy a Bitcoin and it costs me $50,000, they're going to charge me a nice huge fee for me to get that.
No, they won't. Not a huge fee. First, it's important to say that you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. A lot of people don't realize that. You can have 100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So you can buy tiny, tiny, tiny fractions of them. Obviously, most people are not buying entire Bitcoins anymore. If you buy a Bitcoin from Coinbase, they will probably have some kind of fee that will be like...
I think it's like 1% or something.
1%, 0.5%. That's their fee as a business. Different places that sell it will have different fees.
But when I transfer it to you,
then there's a minor fee.
There's a minor fee. This is for all the people who are working all those computers, they get something. Yes. What is the minor fee?
So the minor fee is the fee paid to the Bitcoin miners. And the Bitcoin miners are all the servers out there that are processing the transactions and synchronizing with each other.
Holding that open ledger. They're the ones saying,
maintaining
my
the
ledger matches your ledger, which matches your ledger. They need an incentive to do that work.
That's an energy-intensive, computationally intensive work. Expensive computers do it, and they would not do it if they didn't make revenue somehow. The revenue they make is the fees of the network, all the mining fees, and the new Bitcoins that are created. Now that ultimately runs out over time, but it runs out more and more slowly over time. So the fees are really long-term what sustains that. And I'll say those fees are big if you're sending small amounts, but small if you're sending large amounts. They generally are not percentages. They are like, today you could send Bitcoin for like $5 a transaction.
All right. Let me tell you another reason this is going to fail. It's quantum computing, and quantum computing is going to break the BitChain network. I don't know what quantum computing is, but I am certain it will make this obsolete. If I understand the idea is that a new mode of high-powered computers are going to be able to do a lot more computations a lot faster and break into Bitcoin and finally seize the ability to make more of them.
Yeah. There is truth to that. Bitcoin and most other systems that the world uses for cryptography will be broken by quantum computing at some point.
What is quantum computing?
I'm not exactly an expert.
I saw it in Quantum Leap once, and it was good.
What's important is that quantum computers can do absurdly higher amounts of calculations than normal computers. Not like 2x or 10x, but like 10 billion x kind of numbers. Right. So an address, a Bitcoin account that is perfectly secure from the world's computers trying to crack it, might be destroyed by a quantum computer quickly. So that's the bad news. All crypto systems that currently exist will be destroyed by quantum computers eventually. And eventually is 5 to 50 years from now, right? So not tomorrow. Cryptographers generally see this stuff coming. So this cryptography and quantum computing advances in a relatively transparent way where people kind of see where it is and where it can get to. And Bitcoin is open source software and can be upgraded. And so once quantum computing is popularized and once it starts being a threat to Bitcoin security, Bitcoin network, the protocol, can actually upgrade its security to quantum encryption, right? So
you think it can happen in time?
Oh yeah,
because you know it's going to be some Chinese slave camp of coders that are going to make this thing happen, and the world's not going to know about it until they steal my Bitcoin.
Yeah, let's put it this way: if China could crack the encryption with quantum computers that would break Bitcoin, it could probably also launch all of the U.S. nuclear weapons, right? So would they? Yeah,
but they'd rather have Bitcoin.
I agree. That would be far more productive of them to do it. It's unlikely that anyone would get to the quantum computing power unknown that would actually cause this to be a serious threat. It's a minor threat that, as long as Bitcoin and its developers and its community are aware that that's a threat in the future, can upgrade the system ahead of that. So it's not as big of a deal as people think, but it's also somewhat relevant.
So I'm a victim. I like to celebrate my victimhood. I put a little Bitcoin into what seemed like a reputable company, and they were going to pay me some interest for it, which is, if I've got to do this, great. And they were paying me the interest, which is great. And I got to see the interest went up. This is great. I've got more Bitcoin. When I went to withdraw it, it never came through. Mm-hmm. I could never transfer it. I got ripped off. You remember Mt. Gox, which was the big one, an exchange. An exchange is where you can exchange one coin for another, or one coin for dollars or other fiat currency. They got ripped off. Therefore, it's Bitcoin's fault that these guys ripped me off.
Yeah. So Bitcoin doesn't steal anything from anyone. But if you give your Bitcoin to someone who is either a bad actor or negligent, in the case of your first example, it was a bad actor that scammed you. In the case of your second, Mt. Gox was negligent and lost all their money.
Lost other people's Bitcoin.
Lost, $400 million of people's Bitcoin. You're trusting them. And so just as like when you're controlling Bitcoin yourself, you trust no one but yourself, which is very empowering and very important. There are also many companies that are worthy of trusting. You just have to realize that you're trusting them. So there are companies like BlockFi, for example, that will pay you interest on your Bitcoin, and they're absolutely reputable. They won't pay you crazy amounts. You can earn like 5%, 6% a year, which is reasonable. The scams often are knowable because they offer absurd amounts, like 50% a day or 5% a day or crazy stuff like that. Back to personal responsibility. If you are getting into Bitcoin or cryptocurrency generally, you have to spend the time to learn how to use it safely. And it doesn't take a year, but it takes some days of figuring it all out. And you need to have a healthy skepticism of anyone that you would ever give Bitcoin to. And
also, I would say a healthy skepticism of cryptocurrency. And so when I bought a little bit, bought $10 worth of something, and I could transfer it to another account, and I could see it's like, all right, now I'm starting to get it was trainer wheels for doing this. The reason I bring up Mt. Gox is this analogy. It wasn't a fault of Bitcoin. Mt. Gox was the bank. Robbers came and held them up, or workers at the bank stole the money. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean the money is worthless. It means the bank didn't do their job.
Right. If you had a bunch of gold stored in a vault, and the vault was not doing a good job of vaulting, And
I'm not even sure if that's a term, but yes,
it is now. And if someone stole all the gold, no one would blame gold for that phenomenon, right? Bitcoin is like that. If you give it to someone and they're not trustworthy, that's a problem, right? So be careful who you give your precious Bitcoins to.
And now you can invest in Bitcoin with electronic transferred funds, EFTs, I believe. There's
ETFs.
ETFs. Thank you. Dyslexic.
You can't because of the SEC.
No, there's what?
There are various proxy instruments in the financial system, just like in Jurassic Park when he says nature finds a way, or whatever that great line is. The market finds a way. So the SEC has not permitted a Bitcoin ETF, and yet people have figured out interesting other investment instruments that they can list publicly that you can get exposure to Bitcoin. So those things are all fine. People just need to realize that when you buy a financial instrument where you get the upside and downside of Bitcoin, the exposure, you're not owning the Bitcoin. You're not possessing it. You're trusting someone else and everything that they're doing. Sometimes that's okay. You just need to know that that's not actual ownership of real Bitcoins.
Getting back to security, and I want this to talk about ShapeShift. ShapeShift started as an incredible concept. And when I was playing around with coins, I would take a little coin and I'd bring it to ShapeShift, and it would shift it from a little bit of Bitcoin to a little bit of Ethereum. And then I'd take it from a little bit of Ethereum and I could make it into Dogecoin. And I was like, I get this. And every time you would make some money off of that, but I could see this happen, and it was really cool. You didn't know who I was. I was one of your customers, and off it went, and you couldn't find out who I was. Your company can't really do that the way they did.
Yes and no. So, when ShapeShift launched, and for those who don't know, ShapeShift is my company. It's a simple way to convert one asset to another, one digital asset to another. That's how we started. And when we started, we did not have user accounts, which meant we did not take people's ID. We did not take your personal private information if you're just wanting to convert one asset into another. Neither does McDonald's when they serve you a cheeseburger. I don't want to know anything about you. I just need to know that the Bitcoin you send me is valid, and I'll send you a valid Litecoin or Dogecoin. So we built it for that. We were a little naive about how the regulatory world would work at that point. And years later, in 2017 and 18, we came to the conclusion that we would actually be treated as a financial institution, like as a bank, which meant that we had to invade people's privacy, take their personal information, which is very dangerous. Like warehousing information is how hacks happen and is how all these identity thefts occur. We didn't want to do that. Our customers didn't want us to do that, but we were forced to do that because of regulations. That was 2018. At that point, you had to give us your ID and all this other information. Just this past January, we have figured out a compliant way to basically not do that anymore. And the way we do that is by not being party to the trades anymore at all. So before, you would send us your Bitcoin, we send you Litecoin. Now, you send Bitcoin to a different protocol, and that protocol sends you Litecoin back. We don't ever touch it. We're never an intermediary. We never hold your funds.
You're not a bank.
We're not a bank, right? We remove ourselves from the intermediary relationship, which means that we don't have to act like a bank, and it means that we don't have to endanger you by taking your personal information anymore. So that's relatively new as of January.
All right, so one of the things that you pointed me to years ago is a safe place to put my Bitcoin or my whatever, because I looked at Mt. Gox, I got ripped off over here, and I'm thinking, there's got to be a place where I can just put it under my mattress. If I want to keep my gold coin I can look at it every day, I can pick it up, there it is, I know it's there. You have a product called Keepkey, and it's a decoder basically. It's called cold storage, and it's kind of hard to get your brain around. But I could keep, again, it's a digital thing. I could keep it in an exchange where I can and trust them like a bank, like Mt. Gox, to hold it, or I can keep it myself in a wallet. But I could even put it into a more secure thing, and it's an actual device. And when I showed it to my daughter, it's this wonderful little cool electronic gadget. And it's got a little USB kind of port in there, mini USB port. And I said, no, I keep Bitcoin in here. And she said, is that where you put the Bitcoin in that little slot? It's awesome.
Technically, it sort of is. So Keepkey is a hardware wallet. There are several of these on the market. Instead of the private key, the account number being held in software, like on your computer, where it is susceptible to viruses if you're not careful, by putting that key on a hardware device that is locked away from your computer, you increase the security significantly. So if you're holding a large amount of crypto, holding it on a hardware device is great because the private key never leaves the hardware device. What it means is that your computer can be riddled with viruses and every hacker in Russia can be trying to get it, and they can't. What it also means is that if you don't make a backup of the key and you lose the hardware wallet, it's gone. Your money's gone. Now you can easily make a backup, right? You can write down these seed phrases, which are like 12 words. And if you write those down and store them in a bank vault or under your mattress or wherever, you can recreate your Bitcoin if you ever lost the device or if it broke or something. But again, this requires personal responsibility. You have to know how to back something up reasonably safely in order to use it well. But in that case, it's great. You can put the Keepkey under your mattress. It's probably not a great place to store money because that's like cliche where everyone's money is stored. But
I just keep my pornography there so my mom doesn't find it.
Yes, because that's also not cliche.
Yeah. I gotta say, every time I plug that Keepkey into your site now, ShapeShift, which is a great way to read what's encrypted on that keep. There's always this delay. There's always this. And my heart drops to my stomach every time if I have to wait too long to see what's on here on the screen. And like, it's still there. But after all these years, it's still there. Yeah. How secure is that Keepkey or that hardware device? And I've got my passphrase hidden under my mattress right next to the Keepkey.
Don't say that on TV.
Actually, I don't. It's in a safety deposit box. Very, very separated.
How safe is it? Yeah, it's very safe.
Yeah, how safe? I mean, and how, because electronics fail.
Right,
and now
but you can assume it will fail. Assume the device will fail. You have the backup, you can recreate it. So it's safe from failure of the device, right? There's no such thing as perfect security, right? So there's various trade-offs. You could make 5 backups of it and store those in 5 places, but then each of those places becomes a risk point, right? So you have to think about what kind of parameters of security.
Because if somebody gets those code words, they can recreate.
If you give your code words to your mother and you're like, well, she's trustworthy, so it's good, and then she's like, I got all your Bitcoin. Now you're screwed, right? So you've trusted that person.
And by the way, her VCR still does 12.
So you'd probably be safe.
No, she's just doing that as cover, so that we can. Yeah, she's a mastermind.
Good. Okay. Well, don't give your Bitcoin to anyone, right? Ever. If you want to get more advanced, you can do what's called multi-signature, where you actually take the key and divide it into pieces, and you give that to various people, and then no single person can steal it. So again,
at which point it becomes a science fiction movie when I have to go on 3 different quests to get the 3 different keys and bring them together to unlock the power of Zargon.
It's exactly that. Yeah. I mean, Bitcoin is absolutely sci-fi money. It's cool as hell.
It is cool as hell.
Cool as hell.
All right, I know you got to run. Let me just do the question I think everybody wants to know, which is, having Bitcoin is cool, but the only reason you have any asset is to, at some point, do something with it. Mm-hmm. You can be Scrooge McDuck and roll around in your dollar bills, but at some point you do it so your kid can buy a college education, or you can buy a cool sports car, or something. So where does Bitcoin go in the next year? Because if I'm going to sell some, I like to sell it when it's at high, and I'd like to buy some more when it drops down. So you know this business better than any individual I know, next to my mother. And I want to know, where do you think it's going? Right now, it's at about $58,000, which I didn't think it would hit that big that soon. I'm not surprised by it.
I will paint a example of the past time in Bitcoin, right? So when I got involved in Bitcoin, it was $5. And it was in the midst of its first bubble, which ended up at $31. People who are trying to time the market, right? They would have been like, I don't know if $5 is worth it because it was just 50 cents like a year ago. I don't know if $15 is worth it. I don't know if $30 is worth it. And then it crashes down to like 10. And they're like, I knew it. I shouldn't have bought. Now it's only $10 and I almost paid 15. I'm so smart, right? Then they ignore it. They could have got it at any of those prices, and today it would be worth $58,000 a coin. The mindset of like long-term thinking is really important here. If you're trying to trade it and play the market and make a bunch of money 6 months from now, you're probably going to get hosed by more professional traders that are much better than you. But if you own some Bitcoin over many years, you own a piece of what is only 21 million pieces. You own a piece of that can never be taken away from you. And if you think that sound money is an important tool for humanity, and you own one fraction of the 21 million units of that technology, you can understand why it would appreciate over time, right? And so get out of your head about trying to trade it or time it or like, is this price too much and that price okay? Just acquire some if you're interested in it. Dollar cost average in if you want. Don't try to trade it. Don't freak out when it falls 20 or 30% because it will. It could fall 80%. I've dealt with 95% drawdowns in my time. But at the same time, it has been the greatest investment humanity has ever seen. And it's not random. It's because it is the most important financial technology ever invented. So people should learn about it. They should acquire a little bit of it. Never put your life savings into it and just appreciate that it's volatile. And with that, yeah, go get some.
That didn't answer my question at all. So let me try this again.
You want the price prediction.
Give me a price prediction, because everybody watching this is going to want a price prediction. So at the end of 2021, will it be higher or lower than it is now? Are we in a bubble now?
We're not in a bubble yet, but we will be, and we will be within 12 months, right? So that's a little bit of a estimate. I think Bitcoin goes through cycles, multi-year cycles, each one ending up higher than the last one ended.
It goes higher, and then it slams down, but when it slams down that floor, it's still considerably higher than the low before.
It doesn't just slam down, but it fades over several months in a year, right? So it goes through these seasonal cycles. I think this cycle takes Bitcoin somewhere between $100K and $500,000, right? That's a wide range. In this cycle, meaning within
a year?
Within 6 to 18 months, somewhere between 100 and 500,000 will be the top. After the top, it will crash, and it will crash down, and it will lose 10, 20, 50% of its price. But where does it end up in the next trough, right? Does it bottom out back at 50K, 20K? Probably not. Probably bottoms out like 80K, 150K, something like that. And there's no way to predict it. So don't try. Just acquire some and make a promise to yourself that you won't do anything with it for 5 years. And then 5 years later, see what happened.
If somebody has $58,000 right now, is now a good time to buy Bitcoin, or should they wait until the next dip?
You shouldn't wait.
Don't wait.
You shouldn't wait. Yeah. If you're really worried that maybe we're in the peak of a bubble right now and you have $58,000 to spend half of it. Go buy half the Bitcoin that you were going to buy, right? If you're that worried. But just realize that nobody knows, myself included, what the price will be tomorrow or next year or 5 years from now. If you're trying to time the market, you're going to ruin your life.
Where do you trust?
Too stressful.
Where do you trust to buy Bitcoin? I bought it from Coinbase. I found that to work out very nicely.
Yeah.
You don't actually sell.
We do.
Oh, you do?
ShapeShift does, yeah.
Because you didn't before.
ShapeShift sells Bitcoin, yeah. So the ShapeShift app on your mobile phone, you can buy it with Apple Pay or a credit card. It's pretty sweet. Coinbase
then I'm going to start
totally
switching there.
Yeah, ShapeShift's great. Good price, and you hold it on your own device. So you're holding it on your own keys. You're not trusting anyone else.
I am thrilled.
You can back that up.
I'm surprised. I did not know that.
Yeah, well, we're growing. We're doing more and more stuff. So there's lots of good places to buy Bitcoin, but there's lots of places that might scam you. So anyone listening to this should be careful. don't jump at anything. But
All right, very last question. There are thousands of coins, of cryptocurrencies.
yeah,
If I had $1 to spend, which coin should I put my dollar in? What is
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin?
Yeah, there are lots of cryptocurrencies, and many of them are not trying to be cryptocurrencies. They are just digital assets that do other things, which we don't have time to get into now. If you're starting to be interested in this stuff, do ignore all of them. They're complicated, they require more research, and they require an understanding of what Bitcoin is and what Bitcoin isn't. Just go get some Bitcoin, maybe go get some Ethereum. Those two are sort of the blue chips of crypto. You do not need to go speculate beyond that on the more wild stuff.
You want to buy some Dogecoin?
Dogecoin is a cryptocurrency based on a dog picture, and that's it. And if that sounds crazy to people, it is crazy, and it's hilarious, and for some reason Elon Musk loves it, and he keeps tweeting about Dogecoin. I do not own any Dogecoin, but altogether Dogecoin is worth like $7 billion. Is that crazy? Yeah, but there's a lot of crazy things in life.
Thank you for creating ShapeShift.
Sure.
And thanks for the info.
Yeah, good chat.
Take care. If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.